I'm Daita Sergi, Education Programs Manager with AASHE, and I'll be the moderator of today's webinar. It is my pleasure to welcome you all. As many of you know, AASHE's mission is to inspire and catalyze higher education to lead the global sustainability transformation. AASHE members represent around 20% of the college, and second, we have background noise here, but hopefully it will go away.
Clara, I think you need to mute your computer or your phone, one or the other. You're giving us feedback.
All right, we'll try again. So AASHE members represent around 20% of the colleges and universities in the US, as well as institutions in 20 countries, including China and Finland. You can learn more about AASHE on our website, www.aashe.org. We provide an extensive collection of online resources, networking tools, and educational events, such as today's webinar, and an annual conference and expo, which will be held this year, October 15 to 18, in San Antonio, Texas. Registration is now available, and prices will increase on July 31st. So please visit conference.aashe.org for more information, and we hope to see you there. Also, we provide professional development opportunities like a new mentorship program which launched today. Just a few housekeeping notes before we get started. Everyone in the audience is on mute, but please feel free to ask questions or provide comments at any point during the presentation. You can do that by typing your questions or comments in the questions pane in the control panel on your screen. If you have additional questions, please email them to education@aashe.org and we will get back to you. At the end of the webinar, you will have the option to provide feedback regarding today's presentation. We take your suggestions into account when planning for future webinars, so please fill out the post-webinar survey, and thank you in advance for letting us know your thoughts. Sorry. Please note this webinar is being recorded. If you have technical difficulties or have to leave early, you and others can view the recording later. Additional resources will be posted with the after the live broadcast as well. I'd like to introduce today's presenters at this time. Dr. Deborah Rowe, Clara Fang, and Brett Sees. Deborah is the president of the U.S. Partnership for Education for Sustainable Development, co-founder and director of HIASC, the Higher Education Association Sustainability Consortium, and founder and director of DANCE, the Disciplinary Association Network for Sustainability. And she has been a professor of energy and energy efficiency for 37 years. Clara is higher education liaison at Citizens Climate Lobby and partner at Earth Deeds. Brett serves as director of volunteer education and engagement with Citizens Climate Lobby and is responsible for developing learning pathways that create the most empowered and informed citizens lobbies possible. In the interest of time, I will not go over their full bios, but you can find more about them on the AASHE website. So finally, it is my pleasure to welcome all attendees and thank you for joining us today. Before we start the presentation, we would like to know more about our audience, so we'll have 2 poll questions for you. Feel free to also add any additional thoughts you have on these questions by typing in the questions pane on the GoToWebinar control panel. So the first question we have for you is, what civic engagement actions have you taken in the last 6 months? And you can select multiple choices. So we'll leave the poll a few more seconds up so that most of you have a chance to vote, and we'll also look at the responses shortly. All right, so let's see. The results show that most of you wrote a letter or an email or posted on social media, and maybe half of you also called a member of Congress. This is great. Let's see. Our second question is, have you organized a group activity to get people civically engaged? If yes, can you let us know what you did by typing in the questions pane? And if no, please let us know why also in the questions pane. So a few more seconds to let everyone vote, and we'll look at the poll, at the results in a few seconds. So I'll close the poll right now, and let's see. Well, we have a 50-50 split between yes and no. So at this time, I will turn to Deborah to get us started.
Hello, and I'm glad to welcome you all to this webinar today. And who's running the slides? I still see the poll.
Yeah, and I'm, for some reason, I can't hide the results. So let me figure out why this is happening.
Okay. So as she's working on that, I can get started. I've been working with Clara and with Brett for, I don't know, over a year now. We all experienced through our own professional work, our knowledge gathering, that there are a lot of people who are so worried about climate change but don't have a sense of what they can do about it. We spent some time, my U.S. Partnership for Education for Sustainable Development and our Disciplinary Associations Network for Sustainability, visiting with academic societies. In other words, the national associations for groups like ecologists and engineers and biologists and many others. We received feedback that the faculty and staff and sustainability directors, because we worked with those groups too, are teaching more often about climate change, about its negative impacts, about how tight the timeline is to try and make things better. But oftentimes would just stop after teaching about the potential negative impacts for climate change. The experience of students and staff and faculty and the public who learn about climate change is oftentimes to feel upset, worried, sometimes despair. I've talked to a number of students who struggled with moods and sadness that sometimes spiraled to depression from this. And so oftentimes in order to protect themselves, people would just shut down and not do anything and start to ignore it, or become early cynics so that they don't get involved in helping to make change. And when I talk to a number of people who teach in a variety of disciplines or who run sustainability offices, and actually Deitch and I had a series of meetings and visited with them as well as others, the feedback we got was, well, we know how to teach about climate change, but we don't know how to teach about the potential solutions. The other piece that we found out is that while the technical solutions are already there in many sectors of society to help reduce the worst impacts of climate change, for example, according to the National Renewable Energy Laboratory's Energy Futures Study, which is confirmed by the Stanford Energy Institute work, we can meet at least 80% of our electrical needs in this country using renewable energies and energy efficiency that is already cost effective, that will already pay for itself within its lifetime and actually produce a net positive cash flow. So the technology is there, those solutions are available, but we're not implementing them at the rate that we need to reduce the worst impacts from climate change. The reason why, as we all dug in, and all three of us on the phone have worked with a number of organizations and done a lot of research to dig into this in depth, that one of the main barriers is bad energy policy. And just 2 days ago, there was an article, a good summary article in the New York Times about this. Fossil fuel companies and fossil fuel-based utility companies have a fairly organized effort to go state by state and also at the federal level to push for policies that are holding back the rapid implementation of energy efficiency, of renewable energy technologies. And while many students, faculty, staff, and public are worried about this, they have not engaged on the policy level, or only in a limited way. So what we have done for you is created a set of resources that are really easy to use, that you can implement either in the classroom, or you can implement it as part of your student activities, your sustainability office activities, your student life activities, but also for events for the public that engage people civically. As we all know, democracy only works if we're civically engaged. So I'm ready to show some slides as soon as they're ready. I know it looks like we've had a glitch where we're stuck on the poll. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to start presenting these slides, and it's okay if they don't show as I present, because then we can go ahead and just skip through to the next ones, only because I'm aware of the schedule here and I want to keep us on track. I want to make sure there's time for questions and answers. I want to make sure that there's time for you all to share what your barriers are to doing this work on campus, and so that we can provide you with the answers. So I'm going to start off with why civic engagement. Why is it that we should even be teaching civic engagement? And the first reason why is because it improves student learning. There is a beautiful project that we did with 13 STEM societies, but it was geared for all academic disciplines and student activities on campus. It was called Sustainability Improves Student Learning. It pulled a number of resources. You can find it on the circ.carleton site, and it pulled a number of resources that showed that students get engaged more and they learn more when civic engagement is included in activities, either in the classroom or on campus. It's actually identified as a high-impact learning practice. So in addition to teaching civic engagement because it improves student learning, it also prepares people to participate in democracy. Way too many people have shut down about their ability to influence policymakers and to share their knowledge and to share their desires for the future of our country. We have seen over and over again, all three of us on this webinar today that are presenting, we have seen students and others contact policymakers, have useful conversations, and change people's votes on different bills, policies. So it's important for students to participate in democracy because, as I mentioned before, democracy only works when students actually and the public actually engage. The third reason to teach civic engagement is because it creates better problem solvers, better change agents for our society. Not only is that important to have a more sustainable future of healthier environments, healthier ecosystems, healthier social systems, the triple bottom line of sustainability, but it's also really important because employers are looking for employees who are problem solvers, not the ones who come to them and say, we have a problem, but the ones who come and say we have a problem and here's potential solutions, and we put together a coalition to make it work, and we're just giving you an update. Those are the ones that they want to employ and promote. So for all those reasons, it's very important and worthwhile to teach civic engagement. Secondly, why higher education? Why should higher education become involved in this? Well, first of all, students are going to be affected by climate change in major ways within their lifetime if they haven't already been affected. And many are either concerned about it or skeptical. And some of that skepticism also comes with a lot of emotionality to it. So it's important for us as we teach scientific literacy, as we teach an explanation of those societal problems that are going to affect us all that we can learn about in higher ed and help solve, that we include climate change. Secondly, here comes the slide too. Daita is a stunning problem solver. Thank you, Daita. The national and international literature, and it's the slide right after that, and we're on number 2. The national and international literature on sustainable development and on the learning outcomes that we expect from education for sustainable development, all of that literature includes how important it is to teach students to be change agents, to create systemic change. You know, there is a lot of people get caught on their own individual change. They feel guilty, or they feel disempowered or overwhelmed about how they can't live in more sustainable ways. Well, that's because we don't have the systems and the policies to make sustainable living convenient, to make it the norm, the cultural norm and the policy and regulatory norm. So we have systems that need to be changed. And we have to help students move beyond individual change. Truly, guilt and blame is a waste of time. Proactive problem solving is how we're going to get to a sustainable future. So teaching students how to think systemically, but even more important, act systemically, is crucial. Third, higher education is a really powerful sector of society, filled with experts and community leaders and billions of dollars in economic capital. The U.S. higher education system compares with some of the biggest country economies in the world. So we are also a thought leader, and the ways that we spend our dollars and create our sustainability model, we are an influencer and a role model. Also, higher education increasingly is becoming a convener and a catalyst for surrounding communities, for regions, and for states to weigh in on what we need for a sustainable future. And civic engagement is a key part. So next slide. You'll see that these are the resources that we put together for you. It's not just us. We represent much larger organizations that have worked on this. Easy to use information that you can put throughout your campuses, reach out to the public with it, reach out to the faculty and make sure they're including it, so that the students come out as proactive problem solvers who can create systemic change, and we can fix what otherwise would be the worst impacts of climate change. Anything we do to reduce how much climate instability happens is going to reduce unnecessary human suffering. Also, a lot of this focuses on energy policy. And even for people who still are not scientifically literate about climate change, clean energy policies create more jobs, a healthier economy, a healthier environment that means healthier humans, and also that sense of I can create my own energy. I'm not dependent on government-regulated monopolies. I can be more self-sufficient and resilient, which appeals to many. But I can also be more collaborative and help my communities with non-polluting energy, and our states and our country. So I'll leave it there. I'm going to hand it over to Clara. She's going to talk about the first 3 resources we have, and I'll come back to talk to you about Stop Dooming and Glooming. Clara?
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
So the first resource I'm going to talk about is Citizens Climate Lobby. CCL is a nonprofit, nonpartisan grassroots advocacy organization whose mission is to create the political will.
So your voice is going in and out. It's really hard to hear, Clara. So just to let you know. When you started, it was good.
Okay, so the mission is to create the political will for a climate solution by enabling individuals' breakthroughs in personal and global power. So we educate citizens about climate change, and we provide them with tools and the training on how to make their voices heard with elected leaders. We have hundreds of chapters across the U.S. all working to build relationships with Congress to advance their domestic climate change policies. Let's try to go to the next slide. So CCL was founded in 2007, and these are the resources that we've developed over the years to engage higher education.
Clara, let me interrupt. You're getting an echo, and so I think if you can reduce your volume on your own computer, it may be picking it up and sending it in twice, and then we'll be able to hear you better.
Okay, what if I just speak in here?
That's better.
How's this? Oh, okay, is this better?
No, it got worse again.
How's this?
Go on.
Okay. So these resources, we have the Higher Education Action Team, internships, online learning, and local chapters. The Higher Education Action Team works with CCL members and volunteers to bring civic engagement on climate change to higher education. So I'm going to tell you the stories of a few of our team members. Go back. Aurora Winslade is a sustainability director at Swarthmore College. She got involved with CCL at a regional conference in Philadelphia and was just hooked on this right away. She was instrumental in helping us launch the carbon pricing endorsement initiative for presidents. She got Swarthmore College's president to be one of the first 3 signers of the initiative and to invite over 100 presidents all over the country to also sign this endorsement. Neil Leary is Sustainability Director at Dickinson College. He's also been a big fan of CCL. He taught an environmental studies seminar in the spring and got all of his students involved in the carbon pricing campaign, and their students were able to obtain a endorsement from the Municipal Council of Carlisle. Jason Zekowitz is founded the CCL chapter at Arizona State University, and he is now starting a nonprofit to get artists and musicians engaged in climate change education. David Folland is a member in Utah, and he's been getting students involved in conservative Utah and starting campaigns at BYU and among the Mormon population. So we recently started our internship program. In this program, students interested in gaining experience, organizing, or helping behind the scenes can participate. They can start a student group on campus. They can lead a Put a Price on a campaign without starting a group, or support a local chapter. With online learning, next slide. Okay. CCL's new and improved community website has a ton of resources for civic engagement. We offer webinars and presentations and templates. Members with a login can network with other members and join action teams. We have 418 chapters across the country organized by congressional district, and this map shows where the chapters are located. They meet at least once a month, and you can find them at the link you see on that slide. CCL has a close partnership with Our Climate. Founded in 2016, this nonprofit organizes and empowers young people to become advocates for carbon pricing. So they've developed some resources for higher education as well. CCL partners with them on Put a Price on It. They collaborate with Years of Living Dangerously on videos and celebrity endorsements. CCL also partners with them on the President's Endorsement Initiative. They also conduct state campaigns. So I'm going to introduce the endorsement initiative first. This initiative was done as a partnership between CCL and Our Climate. It's a student-led effort to gain president's endorsements on carbon pricing. So university presidents are influential members of the community who can do a lot to educate others about carbon pricing and influence elected officials. So in this campaign, students asked their presidents to endorse carbon pricing. And since we launched this campaign in January, we've had 35 college and university presidents endorse our letter. We're hoping to get to 500 by the end of the year. And even though this initiative is student-led, staff and faculty working behind the scenes have played an essential role to getting their president's support. Our Climate also works on state campaigns. Because of the current administration, several states are stepping up to take action on climate change. So these are some of the states where Our Climate has active carbon pricing campaigns. With Put a Price on It, this is the principal vehicle that Our Climate engages students in carbon pricing. They engage students as leaders to rally support for carbon pricing on campus and in the community. So they can get involved at a level that's comfortable for them. This fellowship is the most structured program where students would be giving 7 to 10 hours a week, and they have goals and weekly calls with the fellowship coordinator. Field reps have slightly less of a commitment, but they do a lot of the same work. And then action team members receive alerts for actions, but they're not in a structured program. So students in our Put a Price on It campaign have done amazing work, from obtaining president's endorsements to advancing legislation at the state level. They've started Put a Price on It clubs on campus and marched in the People's Climate Movement and used creativity and social media to elevate the conversation on carbon pricing across the country. Another organization that we often partner with is the Congressional Management Foundation. Their mission is to build trust and effectiveness in Congress, strengthening the bridge between Congress and the people it serves. So some of their resources: the Partnership for a More Perfect Union. They provide consulting and education for educational institutions and nonprofits on how to engage with Congress. They do research on Congress to identify advocacy best practices for citizens. They provide training in the form of in-person presentations, webinars, and events. And they recently launched a Citizens Resource Center, which is a clearinghouse of reports and other content to guide citizen engagement with their members of Congress. Okay, and then Deborah will tell you more about Beyond Doom and Gloom Climate Solutions.
Great. Thank you, Clara. So Beyond Doom and Gloom started as a response to the fact that I was getting so many phone calls and emails from students who were feeling so upset about climate change and they didn't know what to do. And I checked in with my other colleagues and they were getting the same thing. And then I checked in with some of the sustainability staffers and faculty and related staff in other areas, and actually they were feeling it too. So we recognized that a lot of people just weren't connected with what the solutions are. Beyond Doom and Gloom Climate Solutions is accessible to you on those links, and Daita is pasting into the chat box those links of those 4 resources, those programs, so that you can copy them, you can use them right away, you don't have to wait until you get the recording of the webinar. For our initiative, and you saw them on Clara's slides just now, but it's also going to be in this chat box for you. And that's that one slide that started before Clara started talking. The Beyond Doom and Gloom has an easy website. It's just climatefixes.org. And the top of the page is a 2-minute, highly motivating video that says, yes, these are the worst impacts that are coming from climate change, but we can make a difference. It has little vignettes from students who have actually made a difference, and it then directs you to a page that give you resources to help remove the barriers to clean energy growth. So next slide. little farther down on this page are these top policy resources. So I'm an energy expert. I won an award from MIT for empowering people in clean energy that was for across the U.S., but also from a number of ministries of energy in countries across the world. And I joined forces with others, including people from MIT's Energy Lab and others. But we found resources that are easy to use for anyone. You'll see that they're organized around solar, wind, how it's got natural gas there to clarify that natural gas is not the solution, and also clean energy on the federal level. Notice how we have Citizens Climate Lobby first, because it is such a great resource. But if you click on any one of those links or have your students do so, they will then be able to see what's happening specifically in states on some of those links and also on the federal level, so they can get involved. But we don't want people to feel like they have to be an energy expert. So next slide. You'll see at the bottom of that page, which this is the formal website, AASHE.org/climate-solutions, but if you just go to climatefixes.org, that's FIXES.org, it takes you to the same page. There's this section on how you can get involved where we say, look, you don't have to be an energy expert. It's okay for you to have an opinion that you want clean energy and energy efficiency, and to call your elected representatives with that information. So there's a link to where people can get the emails and the phone numbers. We also clarify that you can call people who are not in the area where you live. We have seen that this is effective. It's okay to reach out to other policymakers because they're still affecting your future, even though you don't live in their district. And we give sample scripts, as you can see on the bottom of that slide. A little hard to see. Go to climatefixes.org if you want to see it more easily. Little, simple scripts that anybody can use. Actually, I got these scripts originally from some that Carleton College did a long time ago, and that express the desire for more renewable energies and energy efficiency. And then there's additional information, like on the bottom of this slide, we connect you to the We Mean Business Coalition, which is the corporations who are stepping up to the plate and saying, we are taking action on climate because we know that this is happening and we know we have to move forward. I have the benefit of living in Detroit, so I work with auto companies that have taken that stance. You know that GM's made a commitment to go 100% renewable, and working with their heads of sustainability has shown me how much is going on in the corporate sector that we can still nudge them on, but also thank them for and build upon, and the link at the bottom of that page gets to that. But I do think the biggest emphasis nowadays, if we really want to get these solutions going, is to get involved with state energy policy. And I just want to tell you one quick story. So here I am in Michigan, where we had a lot of fossil fuel money that was up at the state convincing our state legislators that we could not have a lot of renewables. And we got students involved. And when students showed up, by making phone calls, sometimes by visiting the policymakers, it changed the conversation. It changed the direction of the policy. And we actually have some of the better energy policies for a state now in the country because of what students did. And it doesn't have to be just students, it can be the public, but many people who are worried about climate change are forgetting about this very important piece. So please do reach out and get your people involved. How do you reach out? Well, of course, you can make this a classroom activity. Next slide, please. And we do have a page that's just for educators. It's in that list that I could just put into the chat box. It's the last link. And it has assignments faculty can use, PowerPoint slides, multiple choice questions if they want to put it into their exams. It also includes essential energy facts, because like I said, a lot of faculty people don't know that. And a link to an earlier webinar we did on Beyond Doom and Gloom with AASHE that describes this initiative in more detail. I should mention that Beyond Doom and Gloom has been created with the strategic direction of the Higher Education Association Sustainability Consortium, made up of 5 presidential higher ed associations and the business officers, the facilities directors, student life, environmental health and safety, AASHE 12 organizations in all, plus 45 academic societies in our DANS network. The last thing I want to say before I hand this off to our next presenter is a really easy way to get this going on your campus. Put up signs all over the campus. Put up signs that say things like, help fix climate change, visit climatefixes.org, or influence energy policy, visit climatefixes.org. We've made it easy for you to help get this done on campus at many different levels. By the way, a great place to put these signs up, and those of you who know me have heard this before, is in the bathroom stalls. Bathroom stalls is prime real estate. People read what's in those stalls. Put those signs up there, as well as the rest of the campus. Okay, and now I'm going to hand it over. Next slide. As we bring in the poll, and then Brett will continue with the details of how you get this done well.
All right. My apologies for that. We are launching the poll right now. If you haven't done any civic engagement, why not? And if you did, there is also an option to let us know that you actually did. So we'll wait a few more seconds to give most of our attendees time to vote. And then
you have to be quick on the draw there.
We'll look at the results. So I will close the poll right now and pull up the results. So, well, most of you actually did do some civic engagement, and of those who didn't, there was a different reason, or actually didn't know what actions to take. And let us know in the questions pane if you have any other thoughts. And I'll transfer over back to Brett.
Yeah, you can hand it over here. Thank you so much, Daita. And as I'm getting kind of control of the presentation, I just wanted to start by acknowledging that we know every one of you is actually giving up time away from your own valuable work, friends, and family to participate on this webinar. So we really appreciate the ability for you to jump in, and we hope that this is value additive and also kind of leads to something that is important in helping work on something that's so much larger than ourselves. So for that, we're really grateful. My name is Brett Cease again. I've been volunteering with CCL since 2011. And as an organization, I think many people are familiar with CCL's vision that Claire described of creating the political will for a livable world. And as all of us know on this webinar, what brings us together is not necessarily going to be easy or has been easy. But what I'm here to really talk about this afternoon briefly is that as prior organizing models have proven, citizens who are passionate, who are well-trained, who are organized by congressional district, and who have a good support system can really more than influence the political process. So I'm here to inject some optimism, and I'm going to do that first by inspiring you with some stories that highlight the process that we've found at work. And again, all of these can be applied to any of the issues that you're calling into along with sustainable development. It doesn't necessarily have to be with our particular solution. And then I'd also love to provide some specific skills and approaches that have worked for our volunteers. So this isn't a Gandhi seminar. I don't think anyone kind of logged in today to learn a lot about just Gandhi. But when we talk about building relationships, I'd like to actually start with a story that I always love sharing about a famous example that occurs between Gandhi and the head of the Transvaal government, General Jan Smuts. If you've read his biography, this might be familiar sounding. And many of you probably are familiar with the story of Gandhi's efforts to convince British to end their colonial rule in India. But before that time, many people might not be aware that Gandhi also fought for the rights of Indians in South Africa. And this brought him head-on into that general featured on the left. So here's how the story goes. Gandhi quietly walks in and tells the general, "I've come to tell you that I am going to fight against your government." And laughing, the towering 6'4" imposing Smuts says, "Oh, really? And do you have anything else to tell me? Without missing a beat, Gandhi responds saying, yes, I'm going to prevail. And astonished at his audacity, Smuts responded by asking, and how are you going to do that? And with that, Gandhi smiled and replied, with your help. Years later, General Smuts admits that this is exactly what happens, and he actually, in his own personal diary, writes this: Gandhi appealed to what was best and most noble in me. Now, when I first heard the story, I also agree that it sounded pretty outright outrageous, but General Smuts goes on to describe why this approach, this methodology, really ultimately helped convince him and the whole government really to start working towards breaking those chains of apartheid. And here's what he says. Just before Gandhi left for India, leaving South Africa forever in 1914, he sent General Smuts a pair of sandals that he had marched into that office with. Smuts wore them every summer at his own farm near Pretoria and returned them to Gandhi as a gesture of friendship on his 70th birthday in 1939. And he remarked at this: I have worn these sandals for many a summer. Even though I may feel that I am not worthy to stand in the shoes of so great a man, it was my fate to be the antagonist of a man for whom even then I had the highest respect. He never forgot the human background of the situation. He never lost his temper or succumbed to hate, and he preserved his gentle humor even in the most trying of situations. And this really is what is at the heart of our methodology as an organization, and it's really, I think, at the heart of the culture that we try to promote in this era of shouting and yelling for how to approach civic engagement. Because what we found within CCL's work, at least, is that using genuine respect and appreciation to see the best in the other person and finding common ground and building relationships ultimately leads to significant change. And as psychologists know, no significant change happens without significant relationships. So let's step back just a little bit to focus on how this kind of Gandhi example might tie into the focus of our webinar. And above all, like we've said, it's really about relationships. And just as a quick example, I'd love to share, two stories from our work. This is a photo that was actually just taken less than a month ago in DC at our national conference, where we met with over 500 congressional offices, and then at the end we presented 4 climate leadership awards to members of Congress. And the story of Congresswoman Mia Love is one of absolute inspiration for me, at least. There are some of her constituents, and these individuals, I won't go to the full story now, but they've had their story written about quite extensively, have really been able to influence Congresswoman Love to take action and really frame even her own arguments for having effective climate solutions that can still have positive economic effects. And even, with her freshman year here in Congress, she was absolutely somebody that at first kind of was not very engaged, I guess, on this issue. They found common values, and we'll get into that methodology in a little bit, but has since really become outspoken about the importance of acting on climate as a Republican. Another meeting that we love kind of showing how a focus of this group is starting is especially the importance of starting with appreciations takes place with another member that we met with this last congressional session. We were expecting to have a face-to-face meeting with that member. He was a conservative representing a larger rural area, but when our group arrived, they ended up meeting with the staffer in an area with cubicles. And although they were disappointed about not having the congressman there directly themselves to meet with, they started with the same kind of methodology. They introduced themselves. They told the staffer how much they appreciated the congressman for the environmental work he'd done in protecting a local wetland. And just then, a voice chimed out from one of the workspaces, "Why, thank you. I feel very good about my work on that." And out came the congressman from behind that cubicle divider and decided to join them for the rest of the meeting. And they had a very productive dialogue focused on these common values. And, I'm sure he had thought that the group was going to rant at him, but instead, by showing that appreciation and starting off with kind of that common ground, that was what got him out to also meet and have that ability to kind of advance in their dialogue. So let's just kind of dive in a little bit to some skill sets, and then I'll close this section with another quick story and explain a couple of things, especially from our concepts. So common ground, we all can really understand what that means. Finding common ground is the key, in our opinion, to any long-term and significant relationship. And building that with our elected officials, whether they're on the congressional level or on the local level, is really what we view as critical for any success with civic engagement. Here's the good news. We have success in the past and ongoing that we can point to, that this does work and it does matter. And in doing that, what we do is three things. We look for shared values, we look for social connections, and we look for places specifically, or people, communities that we care for and that we can share in that concern. Regarding shared values, it can be anything as simple as children, or common religion, or sports teams, you name it. Whatever you have that that you might share with either that elected official or their own staffers is absolutely a plank to begin building that essential relationship with. On social connections, we learn about the people we meet with in advance, and that helps us in building out those shared values. For our meetings, we find out about what former jobs they've had, schools, clubs, or interests they've attended. You can do the same thing with staffers, although it might be a little bit hard to find that details out to that level. And, as one example, what we do in meetings, we usually start by briefly introducing ourselves to have that common ground. And then after we're done, we frequently always say, you've heard a little bit about us. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Where you went to school, your hometown, how you ended up in DC, etc. And I think the important thing to emphasize is that it's not just being polite, but these are things that we really want to know, that we can build off of, and that, again, develop that relationship where trust and values can actually guide significant change in the long term, which I think at times, especially in this movement, especially when we're dealing with the importance of acting now, can often kind of get circumvented or forgotten about. So it's a tough balancing act, but it's one that we definitely want to emphasize. And I'll just emphasize this. Common ground can also be literally a patch of ground on this earth. Whether we're hunters or fishermen and women, whether we're avid recreational cyclists, or we like taking our family out to the beach every summer, members of Congress, our elected officials, staff members, you name it, everyone cares about preserving and passing on a habitable future for the next generation. And people love that passionately, so let's use it as a basis for common ground. We don't just use that to begin our meetings, and I think the important thing is to not think about it just as a kickoff device. And even though we don't have time to fully dive into it today, I'd love to just share quickly an activity that we do with our volunteers to onboard them, to help them develop their own story, because stories are so important while finding common ground. So in this exercise, what we do is essentially, ask people to think of a very specific place or a group of people that they love. And if this is in your own hometown or your congressional district or community where you're going to be meeting with your elected official, all the better. And we know that social science research has shown, the reason why is that people connect much more strongly with their own backyard and concerns for their community than far-off effects. So think about that place. And let me start by basically sharing a quote. This is from the late E.B. White, and I think it's something that we can all relate to. And he says, "Every morning I wake torn between a desire to save the world and an inclination to savor it. This makes it hard to plan the day. But if we forget to savor the world, what possible reason do we have for saving it? In a way, the savoring must come first. In a way, the savoring must come first." And so, even though we won't have a chance to share with each other today, I'd love for you to take the time, maybe even while we're still on the webinar, to think about your place and to try to paint a picture for your story of what it's like to use descriptive imagery and help us or those that you'll share, the importance of understanding why this place is really important. I always share a personal example from my own life. I'm a former wilderness program director from northern Minnesota. I first heard about the impacts of climate change affecting my beloved Northwoods boreal ecosystem from the lead forestry researcher at the University of Minnesota, and the emphasis that he placed on the research showing and demonstrating that the forests were retreating towards Hudson Bay at a rate of roughly about 10 to 15 feet a day, which would mean business as usual emission scenarios, would place all of the economic drivers, the cultural, the tourism that people depend on in those communities throughout northern Minnesota for people in the summer to visit outside of their reach. It would slowly transition to other successions of forests. and the importance of valuing and preserving that environment and that economic livelihood for the next generation. And I think that I'll just close this section by saying that to be able to verbalize what you savor or what you're for, I think is really the basis for a more productive dialogue. This is an important distinction, I think, to focus on because we like to explain, at least organizationally in CCL, we're not fighting against a particular industry or any entity, i.e. the oil and gas companies or specific politicians. Rather, what we are is for something. And I think that's key, right? To be for something like a market-driven approach to reducing greenhouse gas emissions allows that common ground to be built on as well. And, we strive to enable individual breakthroughs in the exercise of this personal power. And what I'd like to do is just kind of help demonstrate that by really kind of emphasizing this story of showing respect through one last case study. This one actually was in the New York Times last month. I'm not sure if anyone read it, but it was called Cracking Washington's Gridlock. And this case study, I think, really brings it all together, all these values of common ground and building out relationships through the story of Jay Butera. Here's a photo of Jay. Jay's worked to address climate change for more than a decade and has been a volunteer with CCL since 2012. And in 2013, he met Representative Deutsch, a Florida Democrat, whose district was experiencing the effects of global warming quite prominently. Butera mentioned that he had a vision to create a bipartisan caucus in the House that would focus on climate solutions. And the two of them agreed to work together towards that goal. So what Butera did was start visiting offices on Capitol Hill to get Democrats and Republicans to sit together. At that time, people laughed at him. He said, they would say, good luck with that. And essentially, what they devised was a 2-by-2 approach, if you will, kind of a Noah's Ark style, where the caucus would grow by twos. A Democrat had to bring a Republican on board to keep equality of numbers. And people were interested, but the question was who would be the first to step forward. And Butera reasoned that the first movers were likely to come from Florida, since the coastal districts are mainly Republican and the coastline is threatened existentially by climate impacts. So what he did was in 2014, he started to build out this engagement in Miami and throughout South Florida. He attended events. He focused on climate change where he met with locals and helped them start their own groups. And he saw that they were dealing with the impacts head on. Some towns had raised the roads, moved wells miles inland to escape seawater, you name it, but there was a disconnect. And so for the next 2 years, what Jay did was essentially work and leverage many other volunteers to address that and essentially take videos and photographs and reach out to 55 mayors, county commissioners, presidents of chambers of commerce, state representatives, and university presidents. Clara and Deborah both shared the importance of building out endorsements. And this here is an example of that endorsement that Jay used throughout Florida. And that ultimately got him a seat at the table with Representative Carlos Curbelo, this gentleman right here on the right. And together with Representative Deutsch, those two in February 2016 jointly filed the Climate Solutions Caucus. Now, I'll skip ahead. Representative Mia Love is now joined on that. You may have heard about this caucus or the story of Jay Butera overall on the New York Times, not only on the New York Times, but also on the Years of Living Dangerously episode, Safe Passage. Be happy to provide you a link to that after the section of this. And now today, this is actually even the most updated Solutions Caucus roster. We now have 50 members, 25 Democrats, 25 Republicans, and all of them are working together to really highlight the importance of common ground solutions, right? The caucus was started by two Floridian Republicans whose districts have become ground zero for rising sea levels. And this caucus is predicated on a simple idea, that we know our nation is facing big problems with climate change, so let's have members of Congress from both sides of the aisle come together, listen to one another, get in that practice again, and find common ground to actually introduce and enact effective solutions. And I'll just close this section by saying that the Climate Solutions Caucus, I think, has really transcended even the issue of climate change. After the horrific shooting of Representative Scalise and several other congressional staffers, Representative Mark Sanford, who's also a member of the caucus, got on Morning Joe the next morning and actually used the caucus as an example of what civic engagement and returning the word civic to the term civic engagement really means. And really what he says is, I think people are looking for ways to do just that and dial back to an era of respect and mutual cooperation. So, what I'd like to transition to for a little bit here is, we basically really emphasize the importance of building political will. And if we say our goal is to create that, then we should probably clarify what we mean. And what I like to think of when we say political will is really any actions that you can take as an individual or collectively to strategically demonstrate to your elected officials that the will of the people is to have a sustainable climate, why we're all here. And with that emphasis, I think the importance is, while the formal definition on the screen highlights the importance of support for a policy solution, breaking it down, political will is really just having a clear demonstration of support back home, right? In district, wherever your elected officials on whatever level you're concerned are existing, because we like to say in CCL that politicians don't create political will, they respond to it. So when you hear our elected officials speak, they're often speaking about their voters, or what they hear most often from their voters. And so our call of action needs to be frequent, it needs to be focused, and it focused on exactly what we're asking them to do. And they want to hear policies from people about what they want enacted. And CCL replicates a model for generating that political will that's been used by other organizations and was initiated by one named Results. And from interviewing members of Congress and from Results model, we know that this method is one of the most efficient ways to demonstrate political will in Congress. And I'll jump into that methodology in just a moment. And from people who study Congress and have a deep understanding about what creates political will and what doesn't. And we, on this webinar, as well as CCL overall, only want to do and ask our volunteers to do things that we know will have a good chance of generating that political will. So we take actions that we know will be successful, and the real question is, what are those actions? So we've organized our actions into 5 levers. We call them the levers of positive or building for positive momentum. And for us, as an organization, our focus is on passing our legislative proposal, carbon fee and dividend, which we think will address climate change in a best first step kind of a way with the most rapid, comprehensible, and equitable national policy out there. However, these levers are going to work for you on any issue, on any level that you have concerns on. So feel free to adapt them as you see fit. And those 5, are pretty intuitive. They're informing policymakers, they're building out media relationships, community outreach, stakeholder engagement, and then campus and student group development. And oftentimes with our groups throughout the country that Clara mentioned, over 420 at this point, these are kind of the levers that we have different committees working on or different volunteers empowered to do. So nothing is more impactful, jumping right into the first one, informing policymakers, than citizens meeting frequently with their members of Congress, with their local elected officials, or their staff. So often, especially with the story of Mia Love or these other members that we meet with, people move right past the staff and overlook them and think that they should be disappointed if they don't actually get a face-to-face. But the important thing is to meet with them as often, to show them that this legislation is something their constituents care about, and to demonstrate as broad and wide of a support for that proposal, whatever it might be for you, back home in district. So for us, we can do that through lobbying by becoming a liaison. That's a term for us that means a one-to-one, somebody that contacts and sets up scheduled appointments with Congress. But again, that can be anybody on a local level for you as well, depending on your interest areas. You can also just make sure to participate and work with other groups that are already meeting with elected officials and see if your connection or cause can also be connected with them and get that experience, or just even participate on the sideline at first and see how others do it. We also really love emphasizing the importance of becoming subject matter experts, especially on national policy. The implications are so different across districts that if you can emphasize not only the regional or statewide impacts of climate change in your neck of the woods, but also the policy positive impacts of what might be posed as a solution, that often helps frame things in a much more clear way for those members or elected officials. So that's truly the most highly leveraged activity we can do. The second example I'd love to highlight is that of building out media relations. So we work with both print and digital media in order to drive the conversation towards carbon fee and dividend, and that involves writing letters to the editor or op-eds, meeting with editorial boards, story ideas, or doing television or radio interviews. You can do all of that, and more, but really emphasizing the importance of social media and print media. Oftentimes, members of Congress or even local officials start their day off by reading the opinion page of each of the local samples of publications. So being able to kind of be a part of that town hall forum still is critical. Thirdly, what we also emphasize with a lever is community outreach, and this means really recruitment and education. On the public side, with climate solutions, citizen advocacy, how to participate in one's government, a lot of the tools that both Deborah and Clara went over earlier are exactly what we offer, and I won't go into details here, but we also participate in tabling at local events. I'm sure many of you on this call have done that. That's a critical way to reach out and engage local groups. You can also clearly engage people on public speaking circuits and organizing events, viewing parties, monthly meetings, you name it. We've got resources on each of these if you're interested in finding out more best practices on each. And then lastly, we also have this lever of stakeholder engagement, which means that building partnerships, not only matter on the grassroots level, but the grass tops level. So really identifying in your leader, who are those in the community that have the voice of your elected officials? Who are those that might be interested in the benefits of any policy on a local or regional or national level that has a climate solution? And working to educate and seek their endorsement is absolutely critical. In that story of Jay Butera, that was absolutely the thing that got him into meeting with Representative Carlos Curbelo and Ross Lathan, was having mayors and local chamber presidents, university officials flank him on both sides. So it wasn't just his voice, but others in the community as well. And then we also want to emphasize the importance of developing chapters in campus or local groups. And for CCL, that's a monthly meeting. Maybe your format might look a little bit different, but to be able to develop a movement on the grassroots level, it's really an essential model to really kind of replicate chapter by chapter groups. We'd be happy to share you our organizing details on how we've done that. For CCL, we're a volunteer-driven organization organized by local chapters, and so groups or chapters are really the hub of where all the action takes place. Each chapter has a group leader or a couple of co-leads. Those people are in charge of communicating each of these subcommittees, and if you're interested in plugging in or seeing how you might do this for your own issue, we'd love to follow up offline. So I realize I've talked a lot. Here's a quick review of all of these levers. And at this point, I'll just close by saying, the beautiful thing about having an approach or a methodology like these levers of positive momentum is that if one is stuck, you can use another one, right? So, for example, maybe you've met with your member several times and they agree that, whatever policy you're, trying to advance is the best proposal. However, they don't support it because there's not enough support back home from primary voters or from businesses. So in this example, the concept of levers allows you to pivot then and demonstrate that support to help move the lobby lever by first focusing on that grass tops or the community leaders lever, and really emphasize that the member is able to have that support by people publicly endorsing that back home in district. So I'll pass it back. Here's again some resources, and I think Clara and Deborah are going to wrap up before we open up for Q&A.
Okay, thank you very much, Brett. This is Deborah, and I know that we have put these resources into the chat box for all of you, so you can go ahead and save those links right away. Visit them in the next couple of days. Plan how you're going to put signs up around campus, because I really think that's powerful. Somebody suggested to me that if you can get the faculty who are on board with this to also put it on their office doors, signs like help with climate change, visit, or influence energy policy, visit, that many students then follow up on what they see. There's also some questions and answers that I know you have, and I think I'll turn it back over to Daita if you're ready to take the next steps here.
Yes, thank you so much to all the presenters for sharing your perspective with our attendees today. And we will turn now to our audience for questions. There are already a few that were submitted, but if you have more, please submit them through the questions pane on the GoToWebinar control panel. So there were a few questions asking for links that were provided in the presentation. We sent some of those through the chat box, but we will also provide them in the wrap-up email that you will probably receive tomorrow. So we'll handle those in the email. But let's get to the first question. So thank you for noting the importance of going beyond individual change and advocating for societal changes in policies and legislations. The pushback that many campuses have shown to supporting citizens' climate lobby is the word lobby and the emphasis on political will. Any suggestions on how we can help campuses overcome these barriers? Deborah, would you like to address that?
To overcome the reaction to the idea of lobbying, I think that's one of the reasons we designed the climatefixes.org portal. It shows that it is a higher education program. It's supported by over a dozen national higher education associations, including 5 presidential associations. And the list of resources has many that don't have the word lobbying in it. Now, I will tell you that when Citizens Climate Lobby first started, my thought was, oh my, people will react to that word lobby. So I think you can get to many of the same resources if you have what I would call a hypersensitive campus about the word, by going to put a price on it, by going to the other resources you see in the chat box. You can also look at, depending on the situation that you are in, talking about how you are not formal lobbyists, you're practicing the skills of democracy, and you're sharing your knowledge with policymakers. So those are some other strategies that you can use. Go ahead, Brett.
Oh, no problem. I mean, I think that's an excellent question, and I think Deborah's comments are spot on, and I would just add that, 501c4 status is what CCL has. We also have our 501c3, which is, featured right there on the bottom, Citizens Climate Education. And I know many, campus groups, not only, are part of the vibrant and, inspirational put a price on it movement that Clara and Deborah have both done a wonderful job highlighting, but they've also started chapters, on, campuses that, don't have the scarlet L word, if you will, of lobby by just calling themselves Citizens Climate Group or Citizens Climate Campus. There is no formal need for you to have that word in if that's the only turnoff. And again, lobby is only one of 5 levers. So if for whatever reason your chapter feels like that isn't an area of emphasis, there's a lot of other levers that are also equally important, and there's nothing illegal about advocating and meeting with your member of Congress about the importance of taking action on climate. If you're concerned about specifically mentioning policies, you don't have to have that, but there's certainly other ways that we've been able to circumvent it that we've highlighted.
One other piece on that, because we know there's been a sensitivity, particularly in certain geographic areas, talking about the bipartisan caucus, I think is very helpful when you come across somebody who thinks that this is just progressives or Democrats who care about it. The other piece that I think you can do is just talk about clean energy, because informing your policymakers about what your students have learned about clean energy, or you or the public, is something that is less controversial, and there's lots of great information out there. But you can also go to the climatefixes.org page for that, particularly the educators page. We have a call to energy literacy that we worked on with Amanda Graham, who was at the Energy Lab at MIT. and I think it'll give you comfortable information to share that then is useful to share with anyone in our society, including our policymakers.
Thank you so much. We have another question. There's a vicious cycle at our school. It's a public school. Our most engaged student leaders are federal work study and paid. So that limits their activism level. Our civic engagement as a result is much more focused on service learning. How can we be civically engaged without being perceived as conducting political lobbying?
Perhaps I can talk about that. A lot of what we do as well is education. So it doesn't necessarily have to be like we are pushing this specific legislation, but just here are the climate solutions that we have. Here's the problem. Carbon pricing is one solution that we think is very effective. There are different ways that you can implement that. And there are other solutions like renewable energy and things that are not very controversial. So I think really using the education and outreach as a lever is a way of saying like, this isn't lobbying. Even when you meet with your legislators, you don't have to frame it as we're trying to convince you to do this, right? It's really like we're informing you about this issue and that our citizens care. So like in Pennsylvania, they're doing an education day and meeting with elected officials, and the students there are really essentially doing education. So hopefully that leads to building political will for action as well.
And I think,
I want to say one of, go ahead,
Deborah.
I just want to say that in our Michigan story of what happened, what was really useful was for students to just find out where the policymaker was at. Oftentimes not even trying to push them in one direction or another. And then sharing that information back with others who did have the expertise. So for example, we had somebody who was a state senator who didn't understand that the proposed elimination of net metering in essence meant that if somebody produced solar on their own house, the way the bill was structured at the beginning, they would have to sell all their solar energy to the local utility company at wholesale prices and buy it back at retail. That's like having a garden where all the tomatoes you grow, you have to sell to the local grocery store wholesale and then buy back the ones you want to eat retail. So once we had students talking to policymakers who explained what more information they needed to make a better decision or explained how they were leaning, they could then just close the loop without lobbying. Or, they just closed the loop, shared the information back with energy experts who could say, do you realize that what you're setting up is something like this? And that tomato metaphor changed the policy.
And I would just add, I mean, both of those comments are perfect, and I really appreciate this question. I think you can't be too cautious in many ways with kind of being, aware of the legal definition between what is lobbying and what isn't, and respect that. But I think that many people often, the chilling effect of, being perceived as being politically active is, clearly much more narrowly confined in the IRS's, definition of what constitutes lobbying. And a lot of these approaches, especially if you point to the tools and you encourage, students or, whatever user groups you're working with to even arrive at their own solutions, but just engage them in the process and really emphasize the stories that highlight that voices and having a chance to speak up do matter, I think is the real kind of key here. And so a lot of that can be done outside of the actual kind of purview of formal lobbying.
Thank you very much. The next question, in order to become a local expert about the policy implications for your home community, what are the most user-friendly resources or best avenues to learn such information?
So I'm really glad that question got asked, because some people do want to go farther than the simple scripts that we have at climatefixes.org, and they want to understand the details. So if you look at climatefixes.org and you scroll down on that page, you will see links to that. For example, the Solar Energy Industries Association has listings by state of what's going on with the fights for state solar policy. The Alliance for Solar Choice focuses on rooftop solar and what's going on with the push from the fossil fuel companies to keep rooftop solar from happening. And by the way, there's a lot of alliances with libertarian and Tea Party groups that are saying we want the freedom to put solar on our own house. So the Alliance, the verbiage and Alliance for Solar Choices is quite across the political spectrum, very welcoming to all. We have other links for wind. We have other links for the federal and this price on carbon, which seems to really be picking up steam and is such an important solution. If you sign up for the PowerShift network, they will send you email alerts. So we have a whole list right here exactly for you. I want to add one other. You can sign up for free for Solar Industry Magazine. That magazine oftentimes has articles on where the fights are occurring. And of course, we also have links for energy efficiency as well. So we've done that work for you. And then Brad or Clara, do you want to add anything else to that?
Yeah, I'll say that, at CCL, it's so important to have a dialogue and that we're listening to the elected officials' views, understanding what their concerns are and what their recommendations are for advancing climate legislation. So, typically we'll just go to their website and to look at what they've done, what they've published. CCL also has had many conversations with all of these members of Congress. We're meeting with them twice a year. Over 6 years, we've gathered a lot of information about their views on this issue. So like if you're in touch with a group leader, they're often able to share that information with you.
And I'd just add, the links that Dieter just posted there are both from our community hub, and they feature kind of local impacts and, really being able to translate not only kind of the impacts of climate change, but also some of the positives of kind of some of these policy solutions on a more local or granular level. And another big thing I think that we've found really additive to a lot of members' meetings is what the Yale Project on Climate Communication has posted. And that is in that second link, which really kind of maps out on a congressional or local district or county level kind of climate opinion across the whole country. And I think one of the biggest takeaways really is that even kind of within kind of the more conservative voters, many more voters than people realize are in favor of, not only acknowledging the reality of our changing climate, but on specific policy actions. So I would just emphasize checking out both of those might be a helpful resource.
Thank you very much. The next question, I'm interested in getting more resources and data that can show people why energy policy change is the most effective way to address climate change. So many people see formal political channels as mired in partisanism and serving interests other than the people and the environment. What do you say to people who see voting and engaging in democratic channels as a waste of time? I'm not looking for an ethical argument, but an argument built on evidence.
I'll say that the Congressional Management Foundation has a really good study on this. They did a study on what is important to members of Congress, and they showed that by far what their constituents thought about was very important to them. And having those constituents communicate that to them, they really listen to that. So people who think that members of Congress don't care what people say, they're totally bought into the lobbyists. Congressional Management Foundation, after having interviewed so many members of Congress, they have data to show that they really do care what their constituents think about, and if they're organized and communicate well, their messages have an impact. So
evidence-based, I think that's the best answer. But as a psychologist who's been teaching not only renewable energies for 37 years, but also psychology for 28 years, I also know that it's stories that evoke an emotional response that are most memorable and oftentimes most motivating. So I think if you combine that, and there's a lot of resources that Citizens Climate Lobby has every week as they tell the stories of what's worked on their calls and on their uploaded videos, but also combine that with that 2-minute video at climatefixes.org, because we have little vignettes of students saying, I did this and I made a difference. And what I found was telling some stories is what's memorable for students and for the public, so that they are more willing to get engaged. The second piece I found in doing my professional development on campuses across the country is acknowledging people's disappointment, acknowledging that it isn't easy and that it takes ongoing effort with resilience that gets the results. That tends to help people move. If they're stuck in unprocessed disappointment, if they're stuck in an expectation they would try something once and it would just work and they'd be done, and they haven't heard the stories of how successes have occurred, that stuckness will keep them from taking action. So they need to build a sense of efficacy, and oftentimes that comes through social learning theory. It doesn't matter what theory, where the bottom line is tell them stories, the true stories of how people have changed people's votes and people's policy. Yep.
I think, I'll just throw in a political science perspective that this commenter might be getting at too, right? Which is, ultimately, the logic behind any individual voter making the difference in any election is clearly, enough to convince anyone that their participation is, worthwhile, and that, it's actually it's irrational to think that kind of your voice or your vote would make the one difference, right? And so I think that we really are pushing up against, kind of a valid concern, and that in some ways it actually, for me at least, has been helpful to acknowledge that. But I think it's also, one quote that I love kind of sharing, dates back even to the founding of the Republic, with Thomas Jefferson saying, we don't have a government of the majority, we have a government of the majority who participate. And so I think really kind of hearkening back to these inspirational stories and highlighting kind of where success has worked. If the examples that we've given aren't enough, we're more than happy to provide others. But I think, as Deborah shared, that's absolutely critical.
Thank you very much. We have a few more questions to answer, but before we go to our last few questions, we have one last poll question. So we wanted to make sure to address this poll before the end of the webinar. So our last poll is, which of these resources that were presented today are you most likely to utilize? And you can select multiple choices. And again, if you'd like to let us know your thoughts or comments or suggestions of why you chose one over the other, you can do so in the questions pane on the GoToWebinar control panel. And we will probably compile all the answers we received in the questions pane, all your comments and all the resources that were provided today in the wrap-up email that will go out tomorrow.
And really, if you would take the time to put something in that questions pane, we really are interested in what appealed to you, why you chose to use those resources, what makes them user-friendly to you, if you have any comments on why you didn't choose one, because we're trying to make all of these as useful to you as possible. Thanks.
So I'll close the poll at this time. Let's see the results. So it looks like Beyond Doom and Gloom comes in first, with Citizens Climate Lobby in second. And I will now go back to our last question. Well, not last question, but the next question, which is, California has a set of robust climate change related policies. Are you seeing a coupling of these policies to civic outreach in California and in other states?
So I can talk about in other states. I can't talk so much in California, although I know there's a lot of action going on out there right now even, and has been in the past. What I find is a gap, is a real disconnect between worries about climate change and engagement in policy. I do think, given that a lot of people look to what California has done, particularly recently after the president left Paris, and we've seen corporations and governors and mayors and many others step up to the plate. I think the governor of California has been highly visible in that process, but there is a lot of great precedents that those of us who are energy experts have learned from watching what California is doing. Beyond the expert to the more novice person who's just worried about climate change, I'm not sure that information has connected yet, although all of us try and make that information available. And I think we could do even a better job. Now remember, if you are interested in working at the national level on this, and you want to help with Beyond Doom and Gloom, to do more than just at your own campus and your community, there's my email. You've got Claire's and Brett's too. You can get involved and have more impact that way.
Thank you very much. We will go to the last question that we have for now. So if anyone has any burning last questions, please send them now. So are these resources applicable also to non-US or Canadian, particularly Canadian institutions? We have a couple of our attendees that are international, so they are wondering of what can they do.
Well, I'll just jump in real quick and say that absolutely on the CCL, CCE side of things, you know, we have a very robust presence in Canada as well as actually globally through other groups, including the Citizens Climate Engagement Network. And so, you know that a lot of our resources, especially if you're looking for, support within kind of the larger organizing space within some of these other countries, especially Canada, we'd be happy to connect you. We have chapters throughout, I think, all 5 other continents outside of North America as well. And a lot of these processes and the strategies that we've kind of talked about today clearly apply, you know, to any kind of human-to-human interaction, not just within our own country.
So a couple of pieces. One is getting a good price on carbon is an international challenge, not just a national challenge. When we offered the first rollout of the climate fixes and Beyond Doom and Gloom, it was at an AASHE webinar on March 1st of this year, and I have all of these listservs with international people in sustainability, and we did not publicize to them. Would you believe that we had 20 countries on that webinar because they were interested in this? So just from that alone, yeah, we've seen that there is real applicability. They don't have the kind of ridiculous climate denial, and yes, I guess I just did call that ridiculous, climate denial and the fossil fuel companies with so much undue influence in many other countries like they do in the U.S. So we have a real job to do here, but these scripts that are at climatefixes.org are very applicable in Canada. Canada's got real serious issues and has flip-flopped back and forth about what kind of future are we going to have, like the renewables future that Ontario has put forward or the tar sands future that we're seeing out of Alberta. And so, you know, that was an oversimplification, but you know what I'm saying. Educating people so that they can engage in the process of sharing information, listening to their policymakers, and holding them accountable for what people want and helping them find that common ground. Those are the materials that are available in all of these resources you saw today, and they are applicable in Canada as well.
Thank you so much. Before we conclude today's webinar, I wanted to let everyone know that our next webinar is next Wednesday, July 19 at 3 p.m., titled How Federal Programs and Partnerships Can Help Reduce Wasted Food on Campuses. Visit our website and register today. Thank you again to our panelists for your presentations and discussion and sharing your expertise with us. And thank you everyone for attending. If you have any additional questions after the webinar, you can email them either to our panelists directly or to education@aashe.org. The recording, presentation material, and additional resources will be available in the AASHE Hub tomorrow, and you will receive an email once they are uploaded. Thank you so much, and have a good day, everyone.
Thank you, y'all.